Welcome to the Leslie Monday Podcast, a show for lovers of all things science fiction in books, TV, and movies. Each week, we'll review something new or dive into an old favorite. So come join me. I'm Leslie, and it's Monday. Hello, and welcome to the Leslie Monday Podcast. I'm Leslie, and this is it. This is the beginning. This is episode 0, or episode 0.1, as I'm calling it. And today on the podcast, I wanted to give you a general overview of my thoughts about this show, what I want to do with it, and also just to give you an overview of The Expanse Season 1, my thoughts on that. And I wanted to do that just because, in my mind, official first episode will be The Expanse Season 5, Episode 1, and I'm going to go episode by episode with a review through Season 5. And I just kind of wanted to give you my thoughts on the first 4 seasons, or just in a quick recap sort of a way, just so that you could have that if you're interested in that, or you don't care and you're going to skip right to the Season 5, Episode 1. Okay, so let's get into it, right? Many of you heard me first on Critics Not Cynics podcast over there with Patrick and Pat. You know that Patrick invited me to guest star and review Star Trek Picard when that came out at the beginning of this year, I believe. It's been such a year. It's crazy. And I really got the podcasting bug from that. I thought this is a fun, creative outlet. It's a good way to reach out and be able to talk about these shows with fans that you otherwise wouldn't be able to reach, and make new friends. And just, it's such an interesting discussion of ideas of, I have a perspective on something, but then you saw it differently, and we can talk about it and have a good conversation. And I really like that. So I did get the podcasting bug and decided, well, I wanted to do my own and have a place where I focus mainly on science fiction. Because as you know, Patrick's podcast, they focus a lot on horror and on video games and things like that. And that's great, but it's really not my jam. So I think maybe you could tell when we went through October and they did Let's Scare Leslie to Death, and I watched some horror movies. I really did try and give it, the old college try and be not biased, but horror just isn't my genre a lot of times, like on its own. So I really did give it a good try, but again, with this show, I wanted to focus entirely on science fiction, whether that's science fiction books, TV, movies, and not necessarily only focusing on what's the latest and greatest, newest thing, but also taking some time to maybe go back and, I don't know, maybe some of our listeners haven't heard of Space 1999 and need to be introduced to that, or let's go back and do Planet of the Apes and things like that. So I didn't want to necessarily always have to be chasing latest and greatest, what's the newest gossip, even though there are some shows like The Expanse that I really do enjoy, and I wanted to do episode by episode. But I also enjoy a lot of older science fiction as well, and I wanted to have a space where I can go back and look at some of that too. So if you have suggestions for things, and you want to send me in a suggestion like, this show is the greatest, or I'm in the UK and I want somebody to do this UK series, I believe is like Red Dwarf is one, or things like that, you can always email me at thelesliemondaypodcast@gmail.com. Send those in. There'll be various places for comments to send things into, but I'm always taking suggestions. I might not necessarily get to everything right away. It might not be the next thing that I get to, but I do take suggestions and I keep a list of those. So there's no shortage, I do not believe, of content that we can go over and discuss and enjoy. Okay, so one of the things for this podcast is my website is going to be the main hub, really. You'll be able to listen to the podcast on Podbean, and I'll be getting it on to Apple Podcasts and Google and various other spaces. But the main hub for me, where I'm going to be checking posting updates and things like that, that will then post onto the social media, is going to be the website. And that is lalunsford.com. And I'll spell that out for you. Try and go slow for you. It is LALUNS as in Sam, F as in Frank, ORD.com. And that will have all the links to all my social media. It'll have the link to go to the Patreon I'm currently working on. It will have the latest and greatest updates on what I'm doing. I may post book reviews there rather than have a segment for them on the podcast at times, depending on how many books I've gotten read when I go to record, things like that. But that's going to be the main hub. And then, of course, the email that goes along with that. Also, just because I mentioned the Patreon, there will be a $1 level on the Patreon for polls. So if I pick out 5 shows from suggestions and I'll throw them out there, you can vote as to which one we'll do next on the show. The other things that is going to be on Patreon will be Star Trek. And mostly I just wanted to have separate spaces for things, to have this podcast be its own thing and have a separate space for Star Trek. If Star Trek's not your thing and you just want to be able to participate in the polls, that's totally fine and I get it. But if you'd like a space where you can just gush over Star Trek with me and we'll discuss, we're going to go through episode by episode from the beginning. And yeah, that's currently, with nothing else, it's like 13 years worth of content at one a week. So like we'll be there a while. We'll be doing this for a while. But I will have that Star Trek specific podcast there, and I will also have the unedited reactions watching the shows. They will be in watch along format. They will not be in picture in picture. So you will have to provide your own copy to sync up. But that is what I am planning on having on the Patreon right now. I have been asked, will I ever do reactions like a typical YouTube reaction channel? I'm not saying never, but I am saying not right now. With my day job and starting this podcast, I need to figure out the balance first. I need to figure out when I can record and stay on track with the podcast itself before I add in the other layer of editing YouTube videos to that. So again, it's not never, it's just not right now, not right this second. So with that all said, let's move into the Expanse Season 1. So just to give you an FYI, I have read all of the Expanse novels. I am up to date on those. I'm eagerly awaiting the release of the final book, which I believe is going to be in March of 2021, something like that. I have not read any of the novellas. I was purposefully saving those because I know that the last book was coming out, and I didn't want to have no Expanse whatsoever if I'd already read, I'd already read those. So I was saving those. When the last book comes out, then I'll read those, and then of course I'll be like everybody, high and dry with no more Expanse to read. But for now, I still have those to look forward to, although I generally kind of know some of the things that take place in them. The Expanse, for me, kept coming up in recommendations like, hey, you liked this, so you should watch that. And it just kept being recommended to me. And I believe this was about the time when only season 1 and 2 were out, and they were still working on season 3, and it was being canceled and the process of being saved and things like that. I probably got to episode 4 or 5 when I ran out to the bookstore and bought the first 3 books and inhaled them. I sat up, way too late at night, trying to then get up at the crack of dawn the next morning to get to work, inhaled those books. I really, really liked it. Again, science fiction, space opera, stuff like this is really my thing. I don't know why. Certain genres or certain things that of our entertainment versus, whether you're really into romance or historical fiction and things, certain genres capture your imagination in such a way that it just kind of doesn't matter if it's the best of the best or it's the worst of the worst. It just really grabs your imagination. And science fiction really grabbed my imagination as a kid. It was there, stamped on my forehead. And then, of course, I really liked murder mysteries, just trying to figure out the mystery as you go through. But no, I was really pulled into this. I really liked it. The most common complaint I really hear about season 1 is people saying, well, it's so slow. They do so much exposition or world building, and it's just slow. That's the biggest word. You could probably just say slow, and that's the word that most commonly comes up as critique when I recommend it to people to try and get them to watch it. I can say that I understand, but I also don't agree. But I am a person who enjoys all of that world building. I enjoy taking the time to really set the stage of this is the world we live in. This is the rules for the universe. This is how things are done, and establishing the characters. And for me, honestly, when you watch the first episode and you get to that cliffhanger when they blow up the Canterbury, you either like it or you hate it. You know, some people absolutely hate it. They were expecting, like, this is the ship they're going to follow, and suddenly they just blow up all these people and they throw up their hands and they're upset. Or other people like me are just shocked and like, oh my gosh, what an amazing cliffhanger. I have to immediately go watch episode 2. So you either love it or you hate it. You get pulled in or you don't with that episode. And yeah, if you hear paper, I'm cheating y'all. I've got notes in front of me that I'm trying to make sure I make the points that I wanted to make. So if you hear paper flip, that's what it is. I'm trying to make sure I hit all these bullet points that I hurriedly jotted down before I started recording this. So I did have one thing written down on here. I wanted to make sure I shouted out Clinton Shorter for the music in The Expanse. It's amazing. If you like soundtracks, movie soundtracks, video game soundtracks, TV series soundtracks, things like that, like I do, this soundtrack is fantastic, and it only gets better throughout each one. And I just wanted to give a shout out, because I don't know how often do people remember to shout out the director. How often do they remember to shout out the costume designer, the set designer, things like that? I probably think of the director and the actors, maybe the writers. But as far as music goes, Clinton Shorter, amazing. I love this soundtrack. There's a specific piece of a song in season 3 that I could like cut this specific, make a loop of it, and I could loop that for hours and just listen to. It's amazing. I also wanted to shout out that my favorite character from season 1 has to be Christian Avasarala, Sheree Adashlu. I hope I didn't butcher her name, but she is an amazing actress, and her character of Avasarala is fan-freaking-tastic in this series, and she only gets better. The character herself is just such an intelligent, such a fierce woman. She's so smart. She makes these decisions that you think, oh, she's such a terrible person, but her motivations of what she's trying to save the human race and the way that she goes about it, like, because for me, my favorite scene within season 1 is when Christian leaks to her friend Frank about the Martian stealth tech being stolen, or that they think that Mars is providing the stealth tech to the OPA. And she leaks to him, and then we have that follow-up of what happens when she says, well, they were calling because they had to ask, and because they had to ask, it means they didn't give it to anybody. And then we get the follow-up to that, where we have the scene with her and Frank, and he basically is like, I'm not going to play with you anymore. But that whole scene, from the way it's shot, the way they're sitting on that bench, the dialogue, it is amazing. That scene is perfection. It is powerful. It's poignant. It's emotional. What else can I put on it? It's so, so great. And she is just such a fabulous actress. I absolutely love her character. Favorite character so far, hands down, at least with this season. I do have a note written down here. I did hear that Amazon is going to end The Expanse with season 6. And I'm pretty much okay with that, especially right now. I'm okay with it right now. It depends on how they end it, but I like that the writers and everyone knows ahead of time and has the chance to try and wrap up the show well. That it's not just suddenly you're canceled and that's it and there's nothing you can really do. They have the opportunity to try and do something, wrap up some loose ends, leave enough to people to still want more. And also, I understand because if you have read the books like I have, there is a very plot relevant, and let's make sure we highlight that it's a plot relevant time jump of 30 plus years. It's not just, oh, the writers decided to jump ahead in time just because. No, it's very, very plot relevant, this time jump. And I wasn't sure how they were going to incorporate that in the first place into the TV show like this. I didn't know if they're going to try and do aged makeup on the actors. I didn't know if they're going to try and get around it somehow. Some sort of, time vortex sort of a thing, wormholes, I don't know. Maybe the aliens in this show can manipulate time in some weird way that we don't know about yet. I just didn't know how they were going to get that across because, again, this time jump is very relevant to the plot and what happens in later books. So it's not just, a trivial thing. So I'm okay with them ending on season 6, that they get the opportunity to try and wrap this up. And of course, because it's been the authors themselves working with the show this whole time, which I think speaks to why the show has done so well, is because the authors themselves are involved. And I think they probably have a good balance. I mean, I haven't heard anything. I'm not a gossip chaser, really, when it comes to what's going on the set and who said what and things, this actor's doing this and this person's doing that. But I haven't heard anything about, like, the producer, and I cannot remember his name right now, but I believe he did work on Star Trek as well. I can see his face, can't remember the name. But working with him and the 2 authors and then the rest of the writing team, like a good balance between what you have in the book versus what you can do with television. Because I think a lot of times people really forget or don't take into account the fact that this is 2 different forms of media and entertainment, right? You have a book which you can do certain things in that you can't really pull off well in a visual format for television or for a movie. And then you have things that you can do in television or a movie that you really just can't pull off that great in book format. So a lot of times when people say that the book is better than the movie, I think it's mostly because when you're reading the book, everything that you visualize, you're in charge of, right? You're the director. You cast whoever's face that you want to see for each character. They look exactly like you want them to look. They wear the clothes you want them to wear. The setting looks exactly as you imagine because you're the one in control reading it. Versus when you get to, the TV or the movie version of something and suddenly you're not the one who's in control, and making all those decisions. It's somebody else. And sometimes their vision just does not align with what you wanted, what you saw. And, from my perspective, that's okay. Yeah, as long as they're not blatantly changing things and making things just totally in 100% opposition to what the book is, then I'm okay with that. I'm especially okay with that when it's the authors themselves who are working on the show and maybe making changes and decisions that way. Because frankly, you're the author and you created this. It's theirs, They're the god of this universe and they can decide who lives, who dies, and what changes to be made. And I think sometimes as the fans, we forget that, or because we just want whatever we want and we don't really give any thought to the fact that, well, this is somebody's creation, and how long they had to sit with that and how long it takes to write a book and then to go through the editing process and then to finally get it published, and all of this time and effort and energy and blood, sweat, and tears that goes into something. Equally so with television and movies, everything that goes into it, just for us to watch it and then be the Monday morning quarterback, backseat driver, what other little analogy, metaphor you could think of for, this and this is wrong, and how easy it is for us to do that on the other side. And anyway, that was a total random tangent. Getting back to it, for season 1, did anybody else stare at Stephen Strait, Holden, if you don't know the actor's name, and think, he looks so familiar, and I cannot for the life of me remember who he is? And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I finally went on IMDb, and there it was. He played War and Peace in Sky High. So did anybody watch Sky High on Disney? He's War and Peace, the fire guy, basically. But I thought that was so funny, and I had a good laugh when I finally figured it out. But yeah, I stared at him for like 5 episodes going, I know his face. I know his face. I cannot remember who he is. That's who he was, at least to me. Maybe you recognized him from something else. But that's who he was to me. So back to season 1 overall, I don't know that I have a standout episode in totality for season 1. I'm looking at an episode list right now in front of me. None of them, they're all good, but I don't have one that was like, this was the episode and it was amazing. I think they're all equally generally amazing. Probably rate them all somewhere on like a 10 scale at like an 8, generally like in that 7 to 8 range every single episode. I like the format, especially in episode 1. Where's my mouse? There it is. Sorry, y'all. But in episode 1, I like how they integrated the exposition into the Belter's OPA speech being in the Medina. So you're getting the exposition, and then you're hearing, which is blatant voiceover exposition. You're like, this is obviously exposition. But then when you get all the way in, it's this guy giving a speech to a crowd. And it's like, as far as exposition goes, I thought that was really clever, and I liked it. Again, like I said, I like world building. I like taking the time to establish the world. So the fact that the season was a little bit slower, maybe didn't move at the pace that people were expecting it to go, because they're establishing, okay, here's what's going on Earth. Here's what's going on with the OPA. They give you that little tag at the beginning. What's happening to this girl? What's happening to Julie Mao? We got to figure it out. And I like taking our time. I like how they take the time and mixing the different genres. You've got Miller and his detective noir story. You've got, basically, when you get to the end there on Eros, a horror story, straight up horror. Holden's pretty much living through a disaster story with the destruction of the Canterbury, which was his world, so the destruction of his world, and then trying to rebuild it, and the other issues that come up. I think it's a really nice blend of going back and forth between these 3 perspectives, what's going on, and how they're each, they're all circling the problem, but nobody really has a clue what the actual problem is. I'm thinking of Knives Out, where he was obsessed with donuts. They're all on the donut, but nobody can figure out the hole. But they're all circling around it, and then they're all coming in together, especially with Miller meeting up with Holden at Eros at the end. I'm trying to think here. Taking a pause, guys. Yeah, I really like the establishment of the story that way. I like that it took its time. Most people have said that they feel like episode 4, CQB, is when it really takes off for them and then kind of goes from there. But just even looking at this episode list and knowing where we wrap up with Leviathan Wakes episode 10, it does feel like, because it's not the full story from book 1, that it's a little bit slow overall from 1 to 10. But we also get more establishment laid throughout the season from books that come after, from 2, from 3. I mean, my gosh, we even have Naomi talking to Fred Johnson in season 1, saying, one day I'm going to come to you with a name. I want you to help me find this person. And that doesn't even become relevant until like book 5. So the fact that we're finally getting this, it's amazing to me, the foreshadowing and little things that they can drop in there that makes The Expanse such an amazing show to watch and rewatch and read the books and then go back and watch it again and see like 5 different things that you missed the first time. It's so good. I like the establishment of Anderson Dawes in this season. He's an interesting character to me that I feel like he kind of ends up dropping off the wayside a little bit in some other seasons. But he does have an interesting, struggling story. And especially when he tells Miller about what happened to his sister and having to make that terrible decision between the rest of his family and her. He's such an interesting character as far as character building goes, that he's not just a one-dimensional villain mob boss, that he has other things and he has these other good motivations and that he wants to help people, but how he goes about it maybe isn't necessarily the best way or isn't without corruption. But I think they established all of our main set of characters very well. I think this season really establishes for you, if you stick with it, that this is a chess game. This isn't a really quick, game of checkers or something that you're just going to play the game and then it's going to be over real fast. This is a chess game. This is a move, counter move, see what's going on, think about it, and the pieces slowly making their way across the board. It's really fascinating. And I'm just so impressed with the writers. I'm so impressed with their work on the show as well as the books that I just am amazed. That's one of those, like, I aspire to write something as well that comes across as well as this. I'm checking my notes again, y'all. Did I hit all these bullet points? If I have my paper here, did I hit each one? Steven Strait, yes, I did. Christian's my favorite character. Got that one. I heard that season 6 is going to be the final one. Check mark on that. Blending of the genres. Check mark on that bullet point. So yeah, okay. So I've pretty much hit all of these hurriedly written down bullet points. Maybe I'll be more organized next time. We'll see. This is me, just starting out on my own. So y'all give me feedback and tell me, oh my gosh, let's stop saying y'all or learn how not to say or a lot. Get away from the microphone, you're too loud, things, I don't know. Just because it's just me by myself, and we'll see how this goes. I'm trying to think if there's any other thing I want to say about season 1. You know what? If you have any questions for me about season 1, like, what did you think about this? What did you think about this season? This scene? What did you think about this episode, this character for season 1? Go ahead and email it to me at thelesliemondaypodcast@gmail.com. Or again, go to the website and click on any of my social media links and leave me a comment there. When I post this, it will go up like hey, this episode is up, like on Facebook or Instagram, things like that. Leave me a question in the comments there and I will try and get to it and make sure I get to it for episodes to come. So right now, I just want to thank you for sticking it out with me in this first foray into podcasting on my own. Tune in next time for my discussion, which will hopefully be more organized, on The Expanse Season 2, my thoughts there. And as always, you can find all the links to my social media at my website, lalunsford.com. That's LALUNS as in Sam, F as in Frank, ORD.com. And thank you, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.